Today on CityCast DC, you've probably driven past one of these cameras without even realizing it. DC police use automated license plate readers owned by a company called Flock, and similar cameras have spread across Northern Virginia, too. Police say they're an important tool for solving crime, but a new Washington Post investigation found dozens of cases where officers across the country have been accused of using license plate readers for unauthorized purposes, including tracking their exes, spouses, and other people in their personal lives. Today we're talking to Washington Post technology reporter Douglas MacMillan, whose investigation uncovered some of those abuses and has already prompted police investigations and new safeguards from Flock itself. Today is Thursday, August 27th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. Douglas, welcome to the show. I'm so thrilled that you're here.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk Flock, because Flock cameras have been all over the news lately. We've seen them cut down, spray painted, covered up. And recently in Virginia, there's been a controversy about the ways they can collect driver data without a warrant. So let's just start broad for folks who maybe are not familiar with Flock. What exactly are Flock cameras and what do they do?
Yeah, so similar to like a surveillance camera, these are cameras up on poles by the sides of roads all over highways and all over urban city centers. And the big difference is, unlike most surveillance cameras, they're mostly focused on capturing license plates. And so they're using AI to read license plate, interpret what that license plate is, and then put it into a database that will allow police investigators to essentially search where any cars that came across these cameras, where they were at any given point. So these are used by 7,000 police departments around the country, nearly one half of all law enforcement agencies in the country. So they're extremely popular. Why they're popular with police, we're hearing, is that they will allow police to kind of reconstruct the physical movements of suspects when they leave the scene of a crime. So if there's someone who's suspected of a crime, and it's a hit and run incident, the police officer investigator can look at all the Flock cameras in the area of that incident, see which cars potentially were involved in that hit and run, and not only get a single snapshot place in time of that one car, but then they can actually see where that car went, maybe where they escaped to, and where they maybe that will lead them to where they are now. So you can see how this can be a very valuable tool for investigators who are frequently a big part of their job is figuring out who is involved in this crime when there's no other evidence other than a camera that is at the scene of the crime. So you can see how this would be really helpful in establishing potentially who is involved and where they went and maybe even where they came from. The problem that a lot of people see with this technology is it effectively gives police the ability to search anybody with a license plate where they were at any given time. And as you mentioned before, this is being done without the requirement for a warrant. Basically, anybody in a police department who's been authorized to use this tool, and we found that it's not even just officers, it's sometimes dispatchers and it's sometimes part-time employees of these police departments, have access to this powerful, almost omniscient ability to see where cars are going at any given time of the day.
And one thing I think is important to note is that it's like a network of linked state cameras. And so if you are doing something in DC, they can get you on a camera in West Virginia when you cross the state line. It's really like an interconnected network of cameras, right?
Yes, that's one of the big innovations with Flock. License plate reading cameras have actually been around for many years. They've existed in some form for more than 10 years in a lot of places. The two main things that are really new with Flock that is helping it kind of find such big success and widespread adoption are, one, the use of AI in the software and analyzing the license plate that I mentioned before. And then two, they're really networking these together so that if they want to, it's an option, but many of them do. If they want to, police departments can turn on a setting that says, I want to share my Flock cameras and as part of a big network of all of these thousands of police departments around the country who are turning on these Flock cameras. So effectively, that allows a police agency, like you said, in one state to track down a suspect who maybe have crossed state lines and gone across the country in another state.
And I think what's so interesting about that is obviously different states and different jurisdictions have different laws. And so I've read reports about flock cameras being used to track somebody who is suspected of a crime in one state, but then those cameras are accessed in states where that thing is not a crime. I'm thinking about things like abortion. And so one of my questions is, let's say that I get into my car with marijuana in DC. I've not committed a crime because possession is legal here. Let's say that I drive my car from DC to West Virginia where recreational weed is not legal. Would the police in West Virginia have a pretense to stop and search me because a flock camera said that I got into my car in DC and drove into West Virginia?
It's a really good question. I think that this technology is so new and this capability is so new that some of these questions really haven't been litigated yet and explored yet in the court system. But I would be really interested in that question because I think as this technology expands and as police, it becomes more and more a part of an ingrained police daily routine. I think we're going to see more and more kind of usages like that come up. And I'm not sure if there are answers to that question, but I think you're probably going to see more and more cases like that come up in the courts where, I think a defendant would have a really, would have an argument there that this technology was used to kind of get around a difference in state law.
So your investigation found that police officers are misusing and really, I would say, abusing their power to look at and access these cameras. How did you first come across this story?
Yeah, so we got a tip a few months ago from an anonymous source who was suggesting that we look into a case of one individual officer in Georgia who had been caught misusing flock cameras to spy on a romantic partner. We started looking at, and that was one of the cases where this officer was facing criminal charges and was being prosecuted for those actions. And we kind of got us thinking, are there any more cases like that? I sent an email to my colleague saying, I wonder how many police are stalkers, because if that number is pretty high, then there potentially is going to be a large amount of abuse of this software tool. So we kind of put our radar out. We started looking around for other cases, and pretty quickly we developed a list it began with about 15 cases where we could find some evidence of that. The number kept going up 20, 30, 40, 50. Currently now, we have a list of over 70 cases confirmed around the country where a police officer used Flock or some other license plate reading tool, but the vast majority are Flock, to inappropriately stalk somebody in their lives. And it is frequently a woman and is frequently a romantic partner. We've found a few things. One, when we talked to the actual victims of this stalking, we spoke to a woman in Georgia who, previously was dating a police chief in a small suburb of Atlanta, Brazelton, and she reported that when she broke up with that man, who was still the police chief, he would send her threatening texts, and he would send her really creepy texts saying, "I knew where you were going." And when she finally, and it freaked her out, she started searching her car for tracking devices. She didn't know how he was doing this. And finally, he admitted to her in a series of texts that she shared with us later, that where he said, basically, I'm using flock cameras to track you. And so what we've found in talking to her and talking to other victims of this is that, this tool gives police really this kind of omniscient power over someone's life. And if you bring that kind of a weapon, of a tool, into a situation of abuse and domestic abuse and a situation where someone is stalking their romantic partner, that can create a lot of psychological torture almost. A lot of women reported to us that they felt like they couldn't even leave their house because that they were being watched everywhere they went. And it can also really aid some of these abusers in their actual physical violence. We saw situations where an abuser would use Flock to determine where a woman was, and then physically show up at that scene and sometimes physically abuse them or physically abuse somebody else who they were with. So this can be a really enabling tool for bad people who have been given the badge and who have been granted this responsibility by our government and by society. And so what our reporting really showed was that there's some things that Flock was not doing to kind of build safeguards into its system to prevent this. And that there are definitely things that the police departments were not doing to build regular kind of safeguards into this kind of system to kind of weed out this abuse and try to prevent this abuse in the future.
What kind of failures were you seeing? Things that both police departments and Flock could have built in as a guardrail or a safety guard against this kind of abuse and misuse that they simply didn't do?
Yeah. So police departments, a very basic thing that many police departments were not doing, and some of them still are not doing, is just to audit what their officers are doing. Flock does create very easy to use software that basically they create logs. Every time an officer uses this tool to search a license plate, that creates a little piece of data with metadata about that search that includes an identifier going back to who searched it. So it's called audit logs, are compiled inside an agency's records. And what we found is that a lot of police departments were not even checking those. They were not even looking to see if officers were using this for legitimate law enforcement investigations. It's a very basic thing that a lot of departments did to do. They just weren't doing it. On Flock's end, we found that a lot of people we talked to were asking why Flock was not requiring police officers to put a case number every time that they were searching the tool. Because basically, anytime you're using this tool, you don't need a warrant, but you do need a legitimate law enforcement reason. And pretty much anytime you have a legitimate law enforcement reason, you should have a case number. You should have a specific case that you are pursuing this investigation, and a reason, a law enforcement reason that you're using this tool. So there's really no reason that you wouldn't have a case number and require a police officer to enter that in the system. What Flock was doing was they were allowing each agency to determine whether or not they would require those case numbers. Only a portion of their agencies were doing that. And so about a week after our reporting, Flock announced that it was going to change its policy, and they are now going to turn on a requirement where every single officer would have to enter a case number for its software. Another thing that they added after our reporting was that they're now going to turn on a feature by default that they call Audit Assistance that is going to essentially use AI software to automatically scan for suspicious activity in each agency's Flock usage and try to surface some of those suspicious searches so that, a police department chief or an internal affairs department can readily see those, basically red flag suspicious usage and try to get ahead of it before there becomes a pattern of abuse over, weeks or months or years.
Yeah, and when you read about some of these cases, as you said, they already don't need a warrant, and it's not like a police officer who is also misusing his, position to stalk somebody in his life is going to put reason for search stalking my ex-wife who left me, right? They can, and it just seems so clear that that would be a feature that would be misused. It's hard for me to understand why Flock would not have made that a default from the beginning, or why they would leave the decision of whether or not police would even need to fill that out or put in a case number, why they would just leave that up to the discretion of the departments.
Yeah, and in fact, in many of the cases where there has been abuse, those fields are filled out with something like wanted or investigation or, just something kind of abstract. Or basically a word or words rather than a case number. So it definitely does seem to be there did seem to be a pattern that was associated with the known cases of abuse. So does changing that, completely eradicate this problem? No, I don't think so. I don't think anyone thinks that. But I do think that by implementing this by default across the board and requiring this for all agencies, Flock has created a meaningful amount of friction for somebody who wants to use this tool for abuse.
You mentioned that some of these changes that Flock has made have come as a result of your reporting, which is great. Like I'm happy to see some impact. But something I know about these cases where a private citizen is essentially stalked by an officer using Flock is that it will either be the private citizen got suspicious and, looked themselves up on a tool like Have I Been Flocked that allows people to see if they've been targeted for this kind of thing, or, a citizen starts to get concerned and goes through FOIA requests, or reporters dig into it like yourself. What does it say that so much of what we know about the misuse of Flock in these police departments only comes because of private citizens or journalists? Like, it's not from Flock itself or police departments doing necessary auditing.
I think it says that police departments have gravitated towards this tool because it's exciting. It's a shiny object, and they think it'll really help them solve a lot of difficult crimes. But they have done so before they were really thoroughly thinking through and putting in place a lot of careful oversight measures to prevent this kind of misuse. And when you think about it, like there's no reason that a police officer in Haines City, Florida, which is one of the cases where we actually found the abuse. We went through the site you mentioned. Have I been flocked? Private citizens and journalists can go through the data on that site and find individual cases of pretty suspicious use. In one case, we found this officer in Haines City, Florida, had been using Flock to track one license plate repeatedly for over a period of 2 years. And when I approached the target, the person whose license plate that belonged to, who we believed was the wife of this officer, that person didn't respond to me. I sent her a text. She did not respond to me. But behind the scenes, the wife went to the officer. The officer immediately went to his department and confessed. The department immediately investigated it, and the next day arrested him. I found out about this the day after that. So it's pretty striking to see that over a period of 2 years there, the department had no idea. It was a complete blind spot. They had this technology. They gave it out to their officers. They said, yeah, go catch some bad guys. But they didn't take the responsibility for looking over how their officers were using this very powerful software. But to their credit, and to the credit, I think, of a lot of departments around the country that are waking up to this, they did act very swiftly and very seriously, treated this very serious when allegations were brought to them about what they were going to do about that. So I think that there is actually a very reassuring reaction right now happening in the police community, which is departments don't want to appear soft on this. They're actually facing a lot of pressure from communities and activists around the country who are, they're basically saying, we want to take your flock away. And cities and police departments are saying, well, we don't want you to take our flock away. So when cases of abuse and the worst cases of misuse and abuse are being brought to light, I think they want to get ahead of it. And they want to look like, hey, yeah, that's not how this should be used. And we're going to crack down on that. We're going to, terminate this person, or we're going to even prosecute this person. And we're going to put in place more serious guardrails that were not in place in the past few years.
When I read information from police departments about their partnerships with flocks and contracts with flocks, they'll usually have some statistics in there about all the different crimes that Flock has helped solve. And it seems a little murky to me because I feel that information is coming from Flock. It just feels very like PR spin to me. And it doesn't usually spell out how and if Flock was used to solve a crime. It'll say, 20 carjackings were solved in the last however many months using Flock. And I always wonder, was Flock just used in solving this crime, or was it the thing that solved the crime? And I think it's curious to me that we as citizens don't have more transparency and insight into exactly how this technology is being used, if it is being used to solve all these crimes, as I feel like we're often being told.
That is a key question that we're exploring right now, is how well does this technology actually work? And to what extent is it actually helping to solve crimes? I have no doubt that it is helping to solve crimes. But there are also some concerning things out there, like there are many reported cases of Flock cameras misidentifying cars and license plates. And like there was a study done in one city that Business Insider wrote about this, where they did a study where they found as many as 70% of the hits that their Flock cameras got were wrong, were incorrect. So I think that's really concerning, the fact that we don't know how accurate this technology is, but that police are going ahead and using it, investigating, and sometimes cases pulling people over at gunpoint before they even check if the Flock camera got it right, I think is really concerning. To what extent is the Flock camera helping to solve crime? The fact that we don't know the clear answer to that means it's really hard for us to weigh what are the cost benefits of this technology. Because a lot of people right now are focused on what are the costs. What is the cost of my privacy? I don't want to be followed around. I don't want to be surveilled. These really concerning cases that we've been writing about police using it as a tool of stalking and abuse, that's a part of the cost. But we don't really know enough about what is the benefit. How much is this helping to cure, crime or solve crime and reduce and make our neighborhoods safer? Flock is putting out these numbers that in their marketing. They now say that Flock cameras are involved in something like 20% of all crimes that are solved across the country. I think that there's not a lot of rigorous academic study behind that, but that's definitely one area that we're focused on exploring.
We talked about this a little bit earlier, but Flock really has become ubiquitous when it comes to this kind of surveillance. They really sprang up all over the country in what feels like a relatively short period of time. However, Flock is taking the brunt of the controversy right now, but there are other companies that sell systems like this and use systems like this, Motorola. Why do you think it is that Flock is the company that is kind of taking most of the heat, even as other license plate technology companies are out there and exist?
Yeah, I don't have hard numbers, but I do think that it has expanded faster than any of these other systems, and it's really set up this network faster than any other system. So that these concerns about sharing data across borders and allowing, federal agents and state agents and local police to all kind of work together on this, cross-border network. I think that is relatively new. I think that this has also raised concerns because some people see this as a Silicon Valley type company. It's not based in Silicon Valley. It's actually based in Atlanta, Georgia. But it does have some very prominent technology industry backers like Andreessen Horowitz, who are bankrolling its rapid expansion. And we've recently heard from some people actually in the police community who feel like this is one of the companies that has come along acting like a tech company and not like acting like a typical vendor to the police community and taking time to actually listen to police, hear police concerns, and trying to see what they can do to serve the needs of the police community. I think they're going about this expansion more like a tech company and trying to think about how can we expand as quickly and aggressively as possible, and so that we can kind of cover as much of the country as much as possible. And we've seen that kind of strategy a payoff for some companies, but we've also seen it kind of come back to bite a lot of tech companies. So I think that's one of the reasons that you're starting to see some of this controversy kind of in the middle of the first big crisis that this company's faced. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see where they go from here. Yes, there have been cities that have been pulling out, but I think probably that's a very, very, very small minority of the total cities that use Flock cameras. So I think that this technology is here to stay, at least for the time being. And I think this company is going to have to evolve. We see this with tech companies like, Facebook and Google, that at a certain point when they get so big, they had to institute trust and safety teams. And I think that, Flock maybe needs to think about having, what is Flock's trust and safety team? And how does Flock focus more on thinking about how this technology could be misused and abused rather than just kind of like letting that happen and then, countering it and then just coming up with a safeguard after the fact. I think you're already starting to see Flock have some growing pains, similar to how a lot of Silicon Valley companies that really focus on rapid growth have had in the past.
That's such a good point because, listen, I care a lot about technology. I write about it. I read about it a lot. I'm no expert, though. It still doesn't take an expert to see this technology and say, oh, police officers are going to use this to stalk the women in their lives. Like, it doesn't seem to me that it would take any kind of special expertise or a crystal ball to say if you give this technology that does not need a warrant, that police officers can just look up whoever they want. They will do that, and it will not only be people that they suspect of committing crimes. It'll be the girlfriend, the ex, the friend, whatever, the ex-wife's new boyfriend, things like that. The fact that Flock, as you said, has pushed for this rapid expansion without meaningfully accounting for what I think is a pretty obvious bad outcome, I think really says a lot.
This is not the first police tool to have been abused by those kinds of bad actors. I think there's a long history of police abusing technologies and systems and databases to, find their ex romantic partners and to stalk their ex romantic partners. So I think that problem and those people existed before Flock came along. But I think that the fact that this company did not kind of address that and think about that and prepare for that, I think you're right, does show something about one of the blind spots of this company.
And here in the DMV area, there's already been a lot of protests and citizens sort of saying, no, we don't want these contracts. We don't want these cameras in our community. We've even seen nationwide people kind of taking things into their own hands, cutting down the poles the cameras are on, or like putting putty on the lenses or covering the lenses. How much of an impact do you think that's really having?
I think it just shows that there is this grassroots opposition to a police technology in a way that we have never seen before. I obviously, don't condone anybody having an act of violence against city property. That's obviously not a good way to, channel your opposition to something. But I do think that this shows how energized this group of people around the country are against, police technology, which is not something we've ever really seen this kind of level of activism or demonstration about in history. I don't think taking down a camera and down at the corner of your street is going to convince the police department to end their contract with Flock. I think I see it more as a symptom of public opinion than anything else.
Yeah, to that end, I follow this real estate agent, Jennifer Fang, who does real estate out of Northern Virginia. And she posted on Instagram that she saw that neighborhoods that have Flock cameras, that was actually impacting home sales, that home buyers were a little bit wary of neighborhoods that had these cameras because of privacy concerns. And I found that to be so interesting because I was thinking, oh, there was probably a time where somebody might think that would make their neighborhood safer. That would be a draw for them that their neighborhood would have these Flock cameras. But what she was saying was that it was the opposite, that home buyers were a little bit wary. And I'm curious, what do you think that says about the public response to these cameras?
It goes right to the heart of this question of, and this is not new, this is something that's been around in law enforcement really since we've had police, which is, how much of your personal liberties and privacy do you want to give up in exchange for more safety? And there's a balance and there's a give and take. And having a camera in your neighborhood is potentially going to help make it more safe, but there are trade-offs and there is potentially less privacy involved in that. So I think that you're starting to see that question come home to live in people's front yards and to live in their neighborhoods and to live at the corner of the street where they see these devices. I think people are more viscerally processing this question of like, do I want a safe neighborhood or do I want to give up some of my privacy? I obviously don't think that a camera is necessarily going to make your neighborhood safe. And I think probably that's, there's some fallacy in thinking that. But I do think that people are starting to kind of weigh that balance more. Also, potentially having Flock cameras in your neighborhood, maybe signaling to real estate professionals that neighborhood was chosen because it has more crime. Maybe that's something that your friend is talking about as well.
With all of this controversy, have you been hearing from Flock? Like, what is Flock saying about all this?
They are, how do I put this?
You can keep it real.
To their credit, they have been giving us interviews and they have been trying to get out front of this. They are trying to talk to us and trying to talk to media all around the country. The CEO has been very visible over the past few weeks as they're kind of going through this crisis. But I think that their message is a little bit fuzzy still. Right now, when they hear stories about police officers who are abusing their system and are getting fired because somebody found that abuse, journalists or victims or the police departments themselves, Flock is their public position right now is we helped get that person fired. That we created a system to root out these bad actor police officers. And if it wasn't for us, then you would have been stuck with these officers and you never would have found them, which the logic on that is, I do understand it. Like, they're saying that they created a system that, has audit logs and has the ability for you to actually transparently find, where the bad action is happening and root out the abuse. But, the other way of thinking about it is Flock gave these police departments a button to, hit whenever that they want to go look inside anyone's lives and search anyone's travel history. And without that button, those police officers wouldn't have had this ability to begin with. So the logic, I think right now that's coming from Flock, it feels a little bit defensive and it feels a little bit knee-jerk. And so I think that like I said, I think that they're maturing as a company. I think they're going to have to go through a lot of maturing and part of that will be figuring out what their response is. Not only just, actually building the safeguards and building the tool to be more responsive and safe, have safeguards built in, but also figure out how to communicate with the public in a way that makes a little bit more logical sense.
And to be clear, some of these safeguards that they're talking about, where they're saying, see, our safeguards, our system is what caught this bad actor, they only implemented that after folks like you and your reporting kind of cajoled them into it, right?
Correct, yeah. Well, they'll say that they had some of these tools available, but they didn't make them 100% default for all other customers until after our report.
One of my last questions, how does it feel to see this almost immediate real world impact of your reporting into Flock? It sounded like that in Georgia, it led to an arrest of this officer who was misusing Flock in this way. Flock has announced these changes. How does that feel for you as a reporter?
It usually doesn't happen in my whole career. I've been doing this for 20 plus years. And a lot of times you write about a topic for weeks or months or even years, and you really don't see any meaningful change in the world. So to see things happen as a result of our reporting on this so quickly has been really reassuring. And it shows that, people are out there are really caring about this issue, and that people in power and people in charge are thinking thoughtfully and carefully and, willing to kind of correct the record and try to fix things that were broken.
If someone listening feels like maybe they might have been targeted in this way, is there something they can do to find out more information if they might be at risk?
Yeah, like you said, Have I Been Flocked is the best website for this. Just go on Have I Been Flocked. If your license plate has been searched by a police officer using Flock, it will likely show up on this tool. It doesn't cover every single search. This is based on Freedom of Information Act public records requests that have been done by basically an army of volunteers around the country. But it does cover a lot of the usage of Flock. So go on that website, see if your license plate is on there, and see which law enforcement agencies have been following your plate. If there is something suspicious, you can reach out directly to that agency, and they might begin an investigation. They might start looking into it because you reach out to them.
Doug, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you soon.